Welcome to the Intuitive Eating Mama podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer D'Amato. I am an intuitive eating counselor and I'm also a mom to 4. This podcast is not just for mamas, it's for all women who are ready to ditch diets, ditch the scale and food guilt forever, and instead invite peace with food, increase their body trust, and confidence in all of her choices. I believe this show is going to shed some light on sneaky ways diet culture has infiltrated your thoughts, your family, and your well-being. No matter the episode, I want you to walk away feeling informed, inspired, and encouraged. So whether you're taking a walk, washing the dishes, or carting kids around, let's dive into the latest episode on the Intuitive Eating Mama podcast. All right, I want it to be known, I definitely do not have a favorite child, but I think I have a favorite podcast episode ever. I have been recording podcast episodes for 3 seasons. You may have noticed this is episode 193. We are actually fast approaching 200 episodes. Wait, no, not for 3 seasons. I have been recording for 4 seasons. Oh my goodness. When I tell y'all you get the real deal, you get the real deal. No, I'm not going to edit out the fact that I thought said 3 seasons. It's actually 4. We're going into 5. Okay, let's get back on track. Season 5 coming. And by the way, some amazing things coming with that. But I think this episode I'm about to share, the rewind, I think it's my favorite. It's actually episode 83. I'm talking deep in the vault here, folks. I'm talking like digging in my computer going, where did I save this one? It's so good. Now, the content is amazing. It is. The beginning is going to actually even give you some highlighted episodes in specific topics that you might want to jot down. Go find those episodes, listen to them as well. Your own kind of summer rewind here. But this episode is so rich with information about intuitive eating. Whether you've been on the journey for a while, whether you're brand new, whether you're like, what are you talking about? Like, what is intuitive eating? I just found this episode and I really don't know. Or you're in a debate of, is this what I've been looking for? I live so frustrated in my relationship with food. I've been dieting since I, was an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 17-year-old. Like, is this what I've been looking for? This episode right here, this rewind, if you've maybe skipped a few of them and you're like, I don't know, this is the one not to skip. It's so good. I just listened to the entire thing and I cannot even emphasize enough how good it is. And I even brought myself back into the space literally. I was in my closet recording podcast episodes. This is like pre-fancy mic. This is before I set up an entire office to be able to record in. And by set up an office, I have a desk and I have a nice microphone. Like, I don't have a recording space. I have to tell my kids to be quiet because I'm not recording in my office anymore. This is like the OG. It's so, so good. Once upon a time, this podcast covered so many topics. I talked about parenting. I've talked about marriage. I've talked about so many things before. The focus was solely on healing your relationship with food, on intuitive eating, body image, the work I do every single day. This episode is, why am I still talking? Like, you're like, Jen, just play the dang rewind. Let's do that right now. Hey ladies, welcome to episode 83 of the Health, Life, and More for Women podcast. I don't know if you've ever watched that show called Mythbusters. It was on TV a while ago. I can remember watching a few episodes and I don't know, I kind of found it fascinating. Things that we think we know, things we think are true, kind of get busted up. Well, I'm about to do that right here on this podcast. We're going to talk about the number 1 myth of intuitive eating. And y'all, I'm about to bust it up. Before we do that though, if you're listening on Apple, would you click the subscribe button? And if you feel like, you know what, I freaking love this podcast, would you leave a star review, write a note on there? I would be so grateful to hear your feedback. All right, let's dive in and bust a myth. I know I said we're going to bust a myth, but all I can think of right now is Young MC's Bust a Move song. Hit it. That's my level of enthusiasm right now. All right, I might have to pause recording and put it on and dance. So, I've talked about intuitive eating many times on this podcast. Part of the reason is it's what I do. I am an intuitive eating coach. I'm also, by the time this releases, going to be completing my intuitive eating counselor work. I'm going into the deepest dives of deep dives with this work. I believe in it. I love it. And when I see women living in full freedom, peace with food, body confidence, I can barely contain myself. If you are looking for some other episodes to listen to me share about intuitive eating, I have a few I'll list here. Episode 49 is probably one of my favorites, partly because the title is It's Okay to Hate Kale. I said it, don't really care for kale. Recently shared a quick way to make kale chips with a client, which is pretty much the only way you will see me eating kale. Episode 53 is the one club you can leave now, and I share all about the Clear Your Plate Club, which I was a card-carrying member for a very, very long time. Episode 65 is How I Know You Are Not Addicted to Sugar. Ooh, I share some real good information in there. That is where I also dive into the Minnesota starvation experiment. Oh my goodness. If you haven't listened to episode 65, I highly recommend it. And lastly, episode 76, Why Losing It All Was Worth It. If you want to hear my personal journey and what I walked through leaving diet culture, that is definitely the episode you're going to want to tune into. I share right here on the podcast, on average, about once a month about intuitive eating. And I do so in a way just to give you information, to inform you so that you can be educated on what is intuitive eating and also what intuitive eating is not. And I do believe there's misconceptions out there, there's myths, there's actual like bold-faced lies out there about intuitive eating. Most recently, there was a book published and endorsed by Gwyneth Paltrow called Intuitive Fasting. Those two words do not belong together. There actually is nothing intuitive about fasting. The only fasting that I would ever endorse as intuitive is when you're sleeping. Yes, if you're not getting up to eat in the middle of the night, that would be fasting. There is nothing intuitive about fasting. The book is diet culture's way of trying to just mess with and tear apart the truth of intuitive eating. So I've shared on the podcast about the greatest example I've ever seen of intuitive eating, which really is a toddler. It's a toddler before we are telling that kiddo to clear their plate. It's a toddler before we're restricting any food. It's a toddler before the pediatrician makes some comment about our child's weight. Toddlers are the best intuitive eaters I know. So I told you at the beginning I was going to address the number one myth. I do think there's many we could talk about here, but for today, I want to tackle what I think is the biggest myth about intuitive eating. And I actually think that this intuitive fasting book believes the myth. So, the number one myth of intuitive eating we are about to bust is that if you are an intuitive eater, you will eat everything in sight. You won't care about nutrition, it's not important to you, and you'll have no control. It's kind of one of the big premises of this book, which is a diet book, Intuitive Fasting, which is not intuitive. They believe you need to restrict your time of eating because you'll eat everything in sight if you don't. So first, I will tell you, one of the core principles of intuitive eating is gentle nutrition. There is a focus on nutrition. It is important, but I want you to think about that word, gentle. It's not aggressive, it's not prescriptive, it's not rigid, it's gentle. And it's gentle because there are other things that are just as and some that are more important than the nutrition piece. Enjoying all the macronutrients, your proteins, your carbohydrates, your fats, and getting in micronutrients every day. That's so important. Yes, absolutely. But at what expense? This is what is not considered in diet culture. It's you must hit these numbers. You must limit these things in order to do what? What is the whole goal of diet culture? It's to shrink your body. It's to lose weight. It's to remind you that the body you are in is not what it should be. Intuitive eating considers the entire person, head to toe, inside out. Your thoughts matter. Your thoughts about your body matter. Your thoughts about food matter. Your thoughts about how you see yourself in this world matter. Diet culture does not care about any of those things. In one way or another, it is manipulating your macro and maybe even your micronutrients. That is the only thing that is important because the end goal of every single diet is for you to lose weight. That is the only goal. And study after study after study has shown that people who diet to lose weight gain back that weight and then some, 98% of the time. Intuitive eating practitioners like myself do care about nutrition, but we consider so many other factors. So this is really already busting part of this myth, because the other part is that intuitive eating leads you to just consuming everything in sight. There's nothing off limits, so you just eat and eat and eat. I'll give you one guess to where this thought comes from. Ding, ding, ding. Years of dieting. Here's why. If you have been restricting a food group, certain types of foods, you've been on this diet and you've restricted, completely limited, eliminated, whatever, all of these foods, and then you hit your breaking point. You quit the diet. You say, screw this. You've had enough. You can't see my air quotes, cheat. Ugh, gosh, I hate that word. Then what do? All those foods you've been restricting, all those foods that have been off limits, you probably overconsume. You feel almost out of control with those foods. But it's not because those foods are causing you to overeat. It's nothing wrong with you. It's the restriction that has led to this overconsumption. You might not recognize the fear that is in the back of your head. I'm going to cut these foods out again. I shouldn't be having these. These foods are, where's those air quotes again? Bad for me. These foods aren't, oh, air quotes, healthy. Ooh, that word has been so demonized by diet culture. The reason you overconsume, you feel out of control, is the restriction. Again, there are study after study after study proving that restriction leads to this overconsumption. You probably think about those foods more often when you're not having them than when you allow yourself to have them. Intuitive eaters do not just eat everything in sight, but what intuitive eaters know is that all foods are available, barring any allergies or sensitivities to food. They have no restriction. So the way I see this is they don't need to eat all the cookies because they can have a freaking cookie whenever they want. They don't need to eat the entire pizza because if they want a slice or 2 or 3 of pizza for dinner, for lunch, whenever they're out, they just have it. They are no longer restricting any food, so they don't have this fear that that food will again disappear from their life. Intuitive eaters don't have to deal with food guilt. They don't have to feel shame if they do decide to have a whole hell of a lot of cookies. They've done the work on their thoughts. They believe all foods are available. The reason it's called food freedom is because they feel completely free to enjoy whatever foods they want. And you can see this goes hand in hand with the other part. They choose foods that are nutritious. And they also choose foods they just enjoy, that they find pleasure in. Sometimes we find pleasure in the Brussels sprouts. I do like Brussels sprouts. But sometimes the pleasure comes from that bowl of ice cream topped with whipped cream. It is a complete myth that intuitive eaters eat everything in sight and don't care about nutrition. I think we've proven that pretty well here today. But you might still feel confused about intuitive eating. You might still have questions. Well, the good news for you is you have an expert right here. Okay, can you see why this one is my favorite? There is a great resource in here, those list of podcast episodes. And of course, there's so much packed into this one. I've listened to it several times, so no shame if you're like, I'm going to go listen to that one again. So good. All right, I know we're done with the summer series. I can't believe it went by that fast, which may be good because me in summer, like I get pretty worn out on it. But one thing I definitely am looking forward to is the fall group starting. This is the last week if you want to join the VIP list. It's in the show notes. It will be closing this week. Do not miss your opportunity to get on the VIP list like the other women who've already done so and taken advantage of all of the goodness that's involved there. All right. I am excited to join you back on here in a full episode next week. I also can't believe I'm preparing for season 5. See, I'll get it right this time. For season 5, episode 200, that's just a handful of episodes away. I'm just having all the feels. All right. Before we get to that, though, we've got some amazing things coming starting next week's episode. I'll meet you right back here next week.